Welcome, intrepid seekers of the unknown, and greetings to those who have returned to delve deeper into the enigmatic realm. Step into the mystic domain of our Cryptic Hunters YouTube page, where curiosity reigns and secrets await. Pull up a stump, dear viewers, for an extraordinary adventure awaits you. Relax, for I shall guide you through the labyrinthine corridors of ancient legends, uncharted territories, and the veiled mysteries that lie just beyond our grasp. Embark upon this captivating journey with me and allow the seductive tales and mind-bending puzzles to transport you to the furthest reaches of your imagination. Embrace the anticipation, for together we shall unravel the tapestry of enigmas that dance in the shadows. Sit back, my friends, and prepare to be mesmerized by the intriguing content that awaits you. This is the Halloween Countdown Special. We have taken tales from viewers like you and compiled them to help us count down to Halloween. We hope you enjoy these tales from your fellow viewers. Encounter with a Skinwalker. I had always loved the solitude of the woods, the way the trees seemed to whisper ancient secrets. That evening, the sun dipped below the horizon faster than I anticipated, casting long shadows that stretched like dark fingers across the forest floor. As dusk surrendered to night, an unsettling silence enveloped the woods. The usual chorus of crickets and owls was absent, replaced by an oppressive stillness that pressed against my ears. I checked my watch. Dead. My phone had no signal, its screen flickering before going black. A sense of unease crept in. I turned to retrace my steps, but the path seemed unfamiliar, the trees shifting positions when I wasn't looking. Panic gnawed at the edges of my mind. I was lost. A rustling sound snapped me to attention. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small among the towering pines. No response, just the rustling, growing louder, closer. I shone my flashlight toward the noise, the beam slicing through the darkness. Eyes, reflective and unblinking, staring back at me from the underbrush, too high off the ground to be a raccoon or a deer. My heart pounded in my chest. The eyes disappeared, and the rustling moved swiftly to my left. I started walking, then jogging, then running, branches whipping against my face. The forest seemed alive, roots snaking out to trip me, low-hanging limbs clawing at my jacket. Behind me, footsteps, heavy, deliberate, matched my pace. A guttural growl resonated through the trees, freezing me in my tracks. I turned slowly. There, partially hidden behind a gnarled oak, stood a figure. It was tall and emaciated, its limbs unnaturally long. The creature's skin was a pallid gray, stretched taut over protruding bones. It tilted its head, mimicking human curiosity, but there was nothing human about the hollow black pits where eyes should have been. I wanted to scream, but terror clamped down on my throat. The creature stepped forward, its movements jerky, as if unused to its own body. It opened its mouth, revealing a maw of jagged teeth, and emitted a sound, a distorted echo of my own voice. "Help me!" it rasped. I stumbled back, the illusion shattering. This thing wasn't lost or in need of aid. It was hunting. Summoning every ounce of courage, I turned and fled deeper into the woods. The creature's distorted mimicry followed me, overlapping voices of friends and family pleading for assistance. The trees thinned unexpectedly, and I burst into a clearing dominated by an old, dilapidated cabin. With no other options, I sprinted toward it, throwing myself against the warped door. It gave way, and I stumbled inside, barricading the entrance with a broken chair. The interior was a shrine of decay, rotting furniture, walls adorned with strange symbols drawn in dark, flaking stains. A foul stench permeated the air, a mix of mildew and something metallic. Outside, the footsteps circled the cabin. The creature scratched at the walls, its voice seeping through the cracks. "Let me in," it crooned in my mother's voice. I pressed my hands over my ears, sinking to the floor. The scratching grew more aggressive, the cabin's fragile structure groaning under the assault. Suddenly, silence. I lifted my head, hope flickering for a brief moment. Then, a whisper brushed against my ear from within the cabin. "Found you." Cold breath grazed my neck. I whipped around, but there was nothing. Only shadows dancing in the dim light filtering through the grimy windows. The creature's laugh echoed around me, a cacophony of stolen voices. Desperate, I searched the room for anything to defend myself. My hand closed around a rusted iron poker near the fireplace. Clutching it tightly, I edged toward the door. Without warning, the creature slammed against it from the outside, splintering the wood. Its arm, a grotesque limb ending in clawed fingers, shot through the gap, grasping blindly. I didn't think. I swung the poker with all my might, connecting with a sickening crunch. A shriek of pain and rage pierced the night. The arm recoiled, and I seized the moment, bursting through what remained of the door. I ran, adrenaline lending speed to my exhausted legs. The forest was a blur, branches tearing at my clothes as the creature's enraged cries pursued me. Just when I thought my lungs would burst, I broke through the tree line onto a familiar road. Headlights blinded me, and a car screeched to a halt. The driver jumped out, shouting. I couldn't make out the words over the blood pounding in my ears. I glanced back. At the edge of the woods, the creature stood watching, its form dissolving into the shadows until it was gone. The driver grabbed my shoulders, shaking me back to reality. "Are you okay? What happened?" I could only manage a whisper. "Don't go into the woods. It's there. It's watching." For weeks after, nightmares plagued me, visions of hollow eyes and stolen voices. I moved to the city and surrounded myself with noise and people. But sometimes, in the quiet moments just before sleep, I hear it still. "Found you!" The watcher in the woods. I had always been drawn to the quiet serenity of the countryside, so when I inherited my aunt's old manor house nestled deep within the English woods, I saw it as a chance to escape the chaos of city life. The locals whispered tales about the place, but I dismissed them as superstitions, just old folklore meant to scare outsiders. The first few days were uneventful. I spent my time exploring the sprawling estate, marveling at its antique charm. But as the sun dipped below the horizon on the fourth day, a sense of unease settled over me. The woods, which had seemed so inviting in the daylight, now loomed like a wall of shadows. That night, I awoke to a faint tapping sound at my window. Groggy and disoriented, I brushed it off like a tree branch swaying in the wind, but then I heard it again, distinct, deliberate taps in a rhythmic pattern. I pulled back the curtain, expecting to see a wayward branch, but there was nothing but darkness. The next morning I ventured into the woods to ease my growing anxiety. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. As I walked deeper, I noticed the forest was eerily silent. No birdsong, no rustling of small creatures, just the crunch of twigs under my feet. I came across a clearing where the trees formed a near-perfect circle. In the center stood a weathered stone altar, covered in moss and etched with symbols I didn't recognize. A chill ran down my spine. Something about this place felt wrong, as if I were trespassing on sacred ground. That night, the tapping returned, louder and more insistent. I tried to ignore it, pulling the covers over my head like a frightened child. Then came the whispers. Inaudible at first, but growing clearer. They were calling my name. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice trembling. Silence. I decided to record the sounds, hoping to prove to myself that it was all in my head. I set up my old tape recorder by the window and pressed record. The tapping began almost immediately, followed by the whispers. When I played back the tape, my blood ran cold. Amidst the static, a voice hissed, "Leave this place." The following day, I visited the local pub, hoping to find some rational explanation. The patrons fell silent as I entered, their eyes avoiding mine. I approached the barkeep, an elderly man with a weathered face. "Do you know anything about strange occurrences at the old, manor?" I asked. He sighed heavily. "Best not to delve into what's meant to be left alone," he replied. "The woods have a watcher, a spirit that doesn't take kindly to intruders." I scoffed inwardly at the superstition, but couldn't shake the fear gnawing at me. That night, I decided to confront whatever was haunting me. Armed with a flashlight and a surge of determination, I headed into the woods. The forest was a maze of shadows, each one twisting into ominous shapes. The air grew colder with each step, my breath forming misty clouds. I reached the clearing with a stone altar. The atmosphere was oppressive, as if the darkness itself was weighing down on me. "Show yourself!" I shouted into the void. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and gaunt, draped in tattered garments that fluttered despite the absence of wind. Its face was obscured by a hood, but I could feel its gaze piercing through me. "Why are you here?" the figure whispered, its voice echoing as if coming from all directions. I live here now," I stammered. "This place is not yours," it hissed. "It has been watched over for centuries. You are not welcome." My courage faltered. "What do you want from me?" "Leave," it commanded, raising a skeletal hand to point back toward the manor. I took a step back, my mind racing. "I can't just leave. This is my home. Then you will join the others," it whispered. Suddenly, ghostly figures materialized around the clearing. Men, women, and children, their faces etched with sorrow. They reached out to me, their eyes pleading. "Help us," they murmured in unison. Panic surged through me. I turned and ran, the apparitions reaching for me as I fled. The forest seemed alive, branches clawing at my clothes, roots snaking around my ankles. I could hear the watcher behind me, its footsteps unnaturally fast, closing the distance. Bursting out of the woods, I stumbled into the manor and slammed the door shut. My heart pounded as I bolted every lock. Silence fell, but it was the kind that precedes a storm. A whisper echoed inside the house. "You cannot hide." The lights flickered and then died, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled for a candle and lit it with shaking hands. The flame cast long shadows that danced on the walls. In the mirror above the fireplace, I saw the reflection of the watcher standing behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices overlapping. "Join us, join us, I backed into a corner, the candle flickering wildly. The room began to warp, the walls closing in. The floorboards creaked as unseen footsteps approached. In a last desperate act, I shouted, "What do you want from me?" The voices fell silent, and the watcher appeared before me, its face inches from mine. It pulled back its hood to reveal empty eye sockets and a mouth stitched shut. It raised a finger to where its lips should be. "Silence," a voice echoed in my mind. Everything went black. I awoke to sunlight streaming through the windows, lying on the cold wooden floor. For a moment, I thought it had been a nightmare. But the scratches on my arms and the mud on my shoes told another story. I didn't hesitate. I packed what I could carry and left the manor without looking back. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Standing at the edge of the woods was the watcher, its hollow gaze following me. I never returned to the manor, and I never spoke of what happened. But every night since I dream of the woods and the souls trapped within. And I know that somewhere, the watcher is waiting, guarding its domain against those who dare to trespass. My encounter with the Whistler. I've always been a skeptic, a man of logic and reason. Ghost stories and urban legends were tales for children, not adults grounded in reality. So when my friend Luis invited me to spend a weekend at his family's old hacienda in the Venezuelan plains, I accepted without hesitation, eager for a quiet retreat. The hacienda was a sprawling estate, its once grand architecture now weathered by time. Surrounding it were endless stretches of llanos, vast grasslands that seemed to merge with the horizon. The first evening was filled with laughter and local rum, as Luis regaled me with stories from his childhood. As the night deepened, the conversation turned to local legends. "Have you ever heard of El Silvo, the Whistler?" Luis asked, his tone suddenly serious. I chuckled. Can't say that I have. Another ghost story? He leaned in, the flickering candlelight casting shadows on his face. They say he was a son who murdered his father and was cursed to wander the earth. His whistle is a harbinger of death. If you hear it up close, he's far away. If you hear it faintly, he's near. I rolled my eyes. Sounds terrifying, I said sarcastically. Luis didn't smile. Just be careful if you hear whistling at night. We retired to our room shortly after. The hacienda was charming, but creaked and groaned with the aches of old age. My room was on the second floor, overlooking the open plains. I left the window slightly ajar to let in the cool night breeze. Sleep came easily until a distant sound stirred me awake. A high-pitched whistle, barely audible. It was a simple tune, repetitive but haunting. I sat up, listening intently. Probably a bird or a local shepherd, I told myself. The next morning I mentioned it to Luis. I heard some whistling last night. Is there someone else out here? He exchanged a wary glance with his uncle, who had joined us for breakfast. No one lives close by, Luis replied cautiously. Could have been the wind. I shrugged it off. The day was spent exploring the estate, fishing by the river, and enjoying the simplicity of rural life. By nightfall, the previous night's disturbance was all but forgotten. But as the clock neared midnight, the whistle returned. This time it was louder, clearer, a melancholic melody that seemed to seep through the walls. I got out of bed and walked to the window. The plains were cloaked in darkness, the tall grass swaying gently under the moonlight. There was no one there. A sense of unease settled over me. I closed the window firmly and drew the curtains, determined to ignore it. But the whistle persisted, growing softer, as if moving farther away. Remembering Luis's story, a chill ran down my spine. If you hear it up close, he's far away. If you hear it faintly, he's near. I shook off the thought. Superstitions have no power over reality. I put in my earbuds and played some music to drown out the sound. The next day, I decided not to mention it. Luis seemed on edge already, and I didn't want to indulge his belief in folklore. We spent the day helping his uncle repair a fence, the laborious work leaving me exhausted. That night, the whistling returned, more insistent than before. It started faint but grew louder, as if circling the hacienda. I couldn't ignore it any longer. Grabbing a flashlight, I decided to prove to myself there was a rational explanation. I crept downstairs and slipped outside. The night air was crisp, the full moon casting an eerie glow over the landscape. The whistle had softened again, seeming to come from the old barn a few hundred meters away. I made my way toward it, the grass brushing against my legs. As I approached, the whistle faded, replaced by an unsettling silence. I pushed open the barn door, the hinges protesting with a sharp squeal. The flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, illuminating dust particles that danced in the stale air. Farming tools hung on the walls, and bales of hay were stacked haphazardly. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. And then from behind me, I heard the faintest whisper of the whistle. I spun around, the light shaking in my unsteady hand. At the edge of the doorway stood a figure, a tall, gaunt silhouette draped in tattered clothing. His face was obscured by shadow, but I could make out the outline of a wide-brimmed hat. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to sound assertive but failing to mask the tremor in my voice. The figure remained motionless. The whistle stopped. A sudden gust of wind slammed the barn door shut, plunging me into darkness. Panic surged through me. I fumbled with the flashlight, banging it against my palm until the light flickered back on. He was inside the barn now, standing impossibly close. His eyes were hollow pits, and a sinister grin stretched across his sallow face. The sack slung over his shoulder and writhed as if something inside were alive. I stumbled backward, tripping over a hay bale and crashing to the ground. The flashlight rolled away, its beam settling on the sack. Through a small opening, I glimpsed what looked like bones. Human bones. The whistler took a step toward me, his movements unnaturally slow. He began to whistle again, the tune piercing the silence, each note dripping with malice. Desperate to escape, I scrambled to my feet and dashed toward the back of the barn. There had to be another exit. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out everything but that relentless whistle. I found a small window and didn't hesitate. I hurled myself through it, the glass shattering as I tumbled onto the ground outside. Ignoring the cuts on my arms, I sprinted back toward the hacienda. Behind me, the whistle grew louder. If you hear it up close, he's far away. If you hear it faintly, he's near. I dared not look back. Bursting through the front door, I locked it and collapsed against it, gasping for breath. Luis rushed into the foyer, his eyes wide with concern. "What happened?" he demanded. "He's real," I panted. "El Silbón, the whistler. I saw him." Luis's face paled. "You shouldn't have gone outside," he whispered. The whistle pierced the air again, this time echoing throughout the house. Luis's uncle emerged from the shadows, a rosary clutched in his hands. "We must leave now," he urged. Windows shattered one by one, an unseen force tearing through the house. The lights flickered and died as darkness consumed us. The whistle was everywhere, disorienting and oppressive. We huddled together, making our way to the back door. As we stumbled outside, the wind howled, and the ground seemed to shift beneath our feet. Shadows moved in the periphery of my vision, twisted forms that reached out with elongated arms. We ran toward the truck parked near the shed. Luis fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking uncontrollably. The engine roared to life, and we sped down the dirt road, the hacienda shrinking behind us. Just when I thought we were safe, the whistle sounded again, faint but unmistakable. I glanced in the side mirror and saw him standing in the middle of the road, his figure illuminated by the red glow of the taillights. He raised a hand and pointed directly at me. Suddenly, the truck lurched violently. One of the tires had blown out, sending us skidding off the road and into a ditch. The impact was jarring, but adrenaline pushed us to move. We crawled out of the wreckage, our bodies battered, but alive. The whistle drew closer. Luis's uncle began to pray aloud, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Padre nuestro que estás en los cielos." The air grew thick, each breath a struggle. I could feel an icy presence closing in, sapping the warmth from my body. Out of the darkness, the whistler emerged once more. But this time, he was not alone. Figures surrounded him, the apparitions of those he'd claimed. Their vacant eyes stared through us, mouths open in silent screams. "Please," I begged, though I didn't know to whom. "What does he want?" Luis's uncle gripped my shoulder. "He seeks souls to carry his burden. Those who do not respect the warnings become part of his collection." Despair washed over me. This was beyond reason, beyond anything I could have imagined. Then, amid the hopelessness, a distant sound cut through. The bark of a dog. From over the hill, a black hound appeared, charging toward us with ferocious intent. The whistler recoiled, his expression twisting into one of rage. The dog positioned itself between us and the specter, growling fiercely. The apparitions began to fade, and the oppressive weight lifted ever so slightly. "Now, we must go," Luis shouted. We didn't hesitate. Guided by the dog's protective presence, we made our way toward the distant lights of the village. The whistle echoed behind us, growing fainter with each step. By the time we reached safety, dawn was breaking. The villagers took us in without question, their solemn faces acknowledging the horrors we'd faced. In the days that followed, I learned that the dog was believed to be a guardian spirit, one of the few forces that could repel the whistler. The villagers performed cleansing rituals, but I knew that some stains could never be washed away. I returned home, a changed man. Sleep evaded me. And when it came, it was filled with nightmares of hollow eyes and that relentless whistle. The world I knew was stripped of its comforting layers, revealing shadows that lurked just beyond sight. I now live in constant vigilance, haunted by the knowledge that some legends are born from truths we are not prepared to face. And sometimes, in the stillness of the night, when the wind is just right, I hear a faint melody, a whistle carrying across the distance, and I know he's still out there waiting. As our time together draws to a close, fellow seekers, we extend our deepest gratitude for joining us on this captivating expedition into the realms of the cryptic. We hope these tales and puzzles have ignited a flame of curiosity within your very being, leaving you yearning for more. Remember, the enigmatic path never truly ends, as there are always new secrets waiting to be unraveled. So until our paths intertwine once again, may your days be filled with a sense of wonder and adventure. Also, please subscribe, like, and follow if you have enjoyed this content. Farewell for now, dear viewers, and may your journeys through the cryptic cosmos be forever filled with awe-inspiring discoveries. Safe travels, and may the enigma forever be at your side.